Hello everyone, I'm a new writer from Vietnam, taking my first steps in creating stories drawn from everyday life yet filled with emotion. Boarding House Diary will take you into a world that feels close and real. Cramped rented rooms, people far from home chasing a living in the city, moments of joy, sorrow, and a love that is both sweet and bittersweet. If this story sparks your interest, please give it a like, share it, and most importantly, hit the subscribe button to support a young Vietnamese writer at the beginning of his journey. Your support is the greatest motivation for me to keep writing and sharing more stories. I was born in a small village in northern Vietnam. My childhood was filled with the sounds of roosters at dawn, the hum of cicadas on hot summer afternoons, and the sight of farmers returning from the rice fields at dusk. My parents worked the land their whole lives, their hands rough and sunburned, but their greatest hope was that I would study hard and escape the hard life they had always known. That night, before I left, my mother packed food for me: dried shredded pork, roasted peanuts, instant noodles, and a jar of braised fish. She kept repeating the same words. Eat well, don't waste money, if you need anything, call home. I could only nod, afraid that if I spoke I would cry. My father stood silently beside her, smoking his old bamboo pipe. When the bus engine roared, he finally put a heavy hand on my shoulder and said in his rough voice, "Study hard, don't waste our sacrifices." The bus door closed. Through the dusty window, I saw my mother still waving, her small figure fading behind the exhaust smoke. The overnight bus rattled on. I dozed fitfully, half awake to the sound of old Vietnamese songs playing from the driver's radio. When I opened my eyes again, the world outside had changed: tall buildings, wide paved roads, endless streams of motorbikes honking. My heart pounded, half excited, half afraid. The bus station was chaos. People pushed and shoved, carrying bags, dragging suitcases. Street vendors shouted, "Banh mi," hot sticky rice. The smell of gasoline mixed with food made me dizzy. I stood there clutching my backpack, completely lost. First time in the city. A woman selling drinks asked, smiling. I blushed and nodded. She pointed me toward the bus that would take me to the industrial district in Dong An, where a room had been reserved for me in a boarding house. The city bus was packed tight. I fumbled with the card reader, almost tripping, while a few students snickered. I gripped the metal pole, sweating as the bus swayed through traffic. Outside the window, shops whizzed by, neon signs flashing, skyscrapers towering. I thought to myself, can I really survive in this place? When I finally got off, I followed a narrow dirt alley, guided by the directions of strangers. The path was uneven, flanked by mossy brick walls. Children played marbles, dogs barked at me as I dragged my oversized bag. The boarding house appeared, a row of shabby single rooms under a corrugated iron roof. In front of each door were old slippers, buckets of water, and clotheslines sagging with laundry. I heard TV sounds, laughter, and quarrels spilling into the corridor. My room was at the very end. The wooden door creaked open to a smell of dampness. Inside was nothing but a battered table, a rusty fan, and a flickering yellow bulb. The cement floor was cold, stained with water marks. I sat down, exhaled, and told myself, at least it's a roof. For a poor student, this is already a blessing. Later, the landlord, an overweight man in a worn tank top, came to check on me. Chewing betel, he chuckled. Most people here are factory workers. Only a few students like you. It's noisy, so get used to it. If not, find another place. I nodded quickly. I had no other choice. That evening, I cleaned the room, spread the mat my mother had given me, and ate cold rice with the braised fish she packed. The salty taste filled my mouth, and suddenly I missed home so badly I almost cried. Night fell. I lay down, listening to everything around me: the fan rattling, rats scurrying across the roof, arguments muffled through the thin walls, and the sigh of some tired worker next door. The city felt enormous, overwhelming. I was just a speck of dust in it. But I knew this was only the beginning. From this tiny room in a crowded boarding house, a new chapter of my life was about to be written. My first morning in the city did not begin with roosters, like back in my village. Instead, it was a chaotic mix of sounds: slippers slapping against the floor, water splashing from buckets, the scrape of brooms, a child wailing. Above it all, a voice shouted, "Hurry up, you'll be late for the morning shift. They'll cut your pay." I rubbed my eyes. Sunlight streamed through the gaps in the corrugated roof, scattering patterns on the wall. Outside, a group of factory workers in blue uniforms hurried out with backpacks slung over their shoulders. Their faces looked tired, but their steps were brisk. At the communal well, a thin woman crouched over a basin, scrubbing clothes while calling to her little boy. "Eat quickly or I'll be late for work." The boy sniffled as he chewed a spoonful of rice, eyes red from chili. He glanced at me curiously. I smiled awkwardly and the mother nodded in return. Music blasted from another room, mixed with the off-key singing of a young man. Pots clattered, kettles whistled, voices rose and fell. It was like living inside a market, where everyone was busy, rushing, loud. Later, a street vendor's cry echoed down the alley. Hot lunch boxes. Rice with fish and vegetables, only 20,000. The smell of braised fish and stir-fried pork drifted into my room. Hungry, I bought a box and ate on my bed. The rice was dry, the meat salty, but to me it was delicious. In the afternoon, the noise never ceased. Night shift workers bathed, day shift workers napped. Fans rattled, children squealed, phones buzzed. I rolled back and forth on my mat, realizing this place never truly slept. By evening, some neighbors gathered to cook together. The scent of garlic and fish sauce filled the hallway. Someone called out, "Hey, new student, come eat with us." Shy but hungry, I joined. They spread a mat on the floor, set down a simple hot pot, water spinach, fish balls, instant noodles. Cheap beer flowed into plastic cups. They laughed loudly, telling stories about shifts, wages, and faraway hometowns. That was when I first noticed Han, my next-door neighbor. She was about 25, small, with a gentle face and a warm Central Vietnamese accent. She smiled often. When she heard I was from the countryside too, she asked about my village, then told me about hers, and about the husband she had left behind to work in the city and send money home. That night, I returned to my room late. Laughter still echoed down the hallway, but inside me there was a quiet feeling, warmth, because I had shared a meal with strangers, and uncertainty, because I was still just the newcomer, unsure how my life here would unfold. After the shared dinner the night before, I began to notice the woman in the room next to mine, Han. She wasn't strikingly beautiful, not the kind that would turn heads on the street, but there was something gentle about her, something that reminded me of home. The next morning, when I opened my door, she was hanging her laundry. Blue factory uniforms dripped water onto the concrete floor. She turned and smiled. "You're new here, right? From the countryside." I scratched my head, embarrassed. "Yes, I just came to start university. Everything feels strange." She laughed softly. "I was the same when I first came. I even got lost for half a day trying to find this place. You'll get used to it. Sometimes I feel lonelier going back to my village than staying here." Her Central Vietnamese accent stretched her words, slow and warm. In this noisy boarding house, her voice was like a calm pause. After that, we spoke more often. At first, just polite greetings, "Back from class? Have you eaten yet?" Then longer stories. I told her about my village, the dike where we caught fish after floods. She told me about her hometown, scorched by dry winds, battered by storms. One day, I saw her struggling with an old fan. I fixed it for her, and while I worked, she asked, "Do you miss home?" I hesitated. The truth was, I missed it every night, but I didn't want to sound weak. "Of course. But maybe it'll get easier." She gave a small smile, eyes distant. "Some things you never stop missing." I didn't ask more, but the words stayed with me. Another afternoon, I was eating a cheap lunch box alone when she returned from work, arms full of groceries. She glanced at me and said, smiling, "You can't just eat that every day. Come eat with me next time. It's less lonely." That evening, I sat in her room for the first time. It was small, like mine, but tidier. A vase of yellow chrysanthemums sat on the table. In the corner hung a wedding photo, Han in a white-out eye, standing beside a stern-looking man. Seeing me glance at it, she said quietly, "My husband. He's back in the village, farming. He only visits once in a while." I nodded, saying nothing. A strange heaviness filled my chest. Dinner was simple, a bowl of soup, braised fish, pickled vegetables. But it tasted better than anything I'd eaten since arriving. She asked about my studies, laughed at my clumsy jokes, and for the first time, I felt like I belonged. That night, lying in my room, I realized the noise of the fan no longer bothered me. I thought of Han's smile, her gentle voice, and the wedding photo hanging silently in her room. That evening, the boarding house felt different. Some of the workers had finished their shifts early and decided to cook together. The narrow hallway turned into a big kitchen, the clatter of knives against cutting boards, the sizzle of hot oil, the fragrant smell of fried garlic filling the air. One worker noticed me peeking out from my doorway and called out, "Hey, new student, come eat with us." I hesitated, shy, but my stomach growled. Nodding quickly, I grabbed my bowl and joined them. They spread a mat on the floor, laying out simple dishes, sour fish soup, boiled greens, stir-fried pork, and a few bottles of cheap beer. The food was modest, but the atmosphere was lively. I squeezed in among them, listening to stories about factory shifts, complaints about exhausting night work, jokes about payday and sending money back home. Laughter and the clinking of beer cups echoed down the hallway. I smiled along, feeling pulled into the noisy rhythm of the boarding house. What caught my attention most, though, was Han. She sat beside me, gently placing vegetables into my bowl with a smile. "Eat more," she said. "You'll need strength to study." I nodded, cheeks warm. For the first time since arriving in the city, I didn't feel so out of place. The conversation bounced from topic to topic: villages, families, the city, school. When I mentioned I had just left a small northern village, one man teased. "So you probably still miss the sound of roosters more than car horns, huh?" Everyone laughed, and I joined in, though a pang of homesickness tugged at me. Han glanced at me, her eyes soft, as if she understood. As the meal went on and the beer loosened tongues, the stories grew more personal: love gone wrong, children learning to walk, dreams left behind. It was noisy, messy, but there was warmth in it all. When the rain suddenly poured down, hammering against the corrugated roof, the group huddled closer on the mat, eating and drinking as the wind howled outside. I looked around and felt, strangely, like I was part of a family. After the meal, as I walked back to my room, Han called softly from her doorway. "Come eat with me tomorrow. Don't waste money on outside food, it's boring anyway." I hesitated, then nodded. A quiet joy stirred inside me. That night, with the rain still falling, I lay in bed feeling warm. I thought about the shared meal, Han's smile, and whispered to myself, maybe I'm starting to belong here. After that shared dinner, Han and I began talking more often. At first it was just casual greetings in the hallway, but soon the conversation stretched long into the evening, until we lost track of time. One afternoon, when I came back from class, I saw her sitting in front of her door, entangling a pile of sewing threads. I asked, "What are you doing?" She looked up with a smile. "Threads from the factory. I take them home and reuse them." I sat beside her and told her about my day, about the strict professor, the classmate who always dozed off in lectures. She laughed and said, "Students have it easy. Try working shifts, then you'll know what's hard." Then she asked, "So, where's your hometown?" I told her about my small northern village, the long dike running beside rice fields, the children catching fish after floods, the weekend market, the fragrance of green rice in autumn. My voice grew animated, as if all those memories were rushing back. Han listened quietly, nodding from time to time. When I finished, she sighed softly. "My hometown is in central Vietnam. The hot, dry winds burn your skin in summer, and every year storms tear away our roofs. We ran from floods so many times. But, I miss it. I miss the cornfields, the beach at dawn, even the smell of roasted sweet potatoes by the fire." Her voice was sweet but tinged with sadness. In her eyes I glimpsed a loneliness, longing for home, for family, and perhaps for the husband far away. From that day, it became a routine. At night, we often sat outside our doors and talked about the past. I told her childhood stories: climbing guava trees, swimming in the river, being scolded by my mother. She laughed until her eyes crinkled, her tired face lit with rare brightness. In return, she told me how she had to quit school early to help her parents, then married young. She spoke calmly, but I sensed regret in her words. One rainy night, as the downpour drummed on the corrugated roof, she said, "When I was little, every storm season, my family had to run to the high ground. Water swallowed the fields, buffalo swept away, roofs ripped off. Once I thought we wouldn't survive. But we did. I grew up anyway. I guess I'm as tough as grass." I sat in silence, admiration welling in me. The woman beside me looked small, gentle, but inside she was stronger than I had imagined. At one point she asked, "After you graduate, will you go back to your village?" I thought for a while, then said, "I don't know. Going back means being close to family, but jobs are scarce. Staying in the city means more opportunities, but it's lonely." She gazed into the distance, smiling faintly. "Everywhere is like that. You gain one thing, you lose another." Her words echoed in my head the rest of the night. From then on, our evening talks became a habit. People passing by in the boarding house barely noticed anymore. Only I knew how much those conversations meant. Every time I sat with her, I felt a little less empty inside. In this noisy, crowded city, I had found a small piece of home. That afternoon, I left class later than usual. The summer sun in the city was harsh, burning down on the pavement. I pedaled out of the university gate, sweat soaking my shirt. Just as I was about to head straight back to my room, dark clouds suddenly gathered. A gust of wind swept dust into the air, and then the sky opened, dumping buckets of rain as if someone had overturned a basin above us. I hurried, steering my bike under the awning of a small grocery shop. The rain fell in sheets, steam rising from the hot asphalt. Motorbikes crowded the roadside, people scrambling, some covering themselves with plastic bags, others fumbling with thin raincoats. Through the roar of the downpour, I heard a familiar voice. You're caught in the rain too. I turned and saw Han. Her factory uniform clung to her, hair damp and plastered to her face, raindrops gliding down her cheeks. She smiled, her face flushed from the chill. I froze for a moment, then nodded. Yeah, class just ended, and the rain came out of nowhere. She stood beside me, the smell of cheap shampoo mixed with the earthy scent of rain. We were close enough that I noticed her hands trembling slightly from the cold. Embarrassed, I pulled out a handkerchief my mother had packed for me back home, something I rarely used. Here, you can use this. Don't want you catching a cold. She accepted it with a small laugh. You're always this thoughtful, huh? I scratched my head, unsure what to say, and grinned sheepishly. The rain hammered on the corrugated roof above, drowning out the street noise. Traffic stalled as water pooled along the road. We stood side by side, watching people rush by. Han told me how her supervisor had scolded her at work that day, then shrugged with a smile. You get used to it. As long as the job's still there, you just take it. I nodded, a pang of sympathy hitting me. At school, a teacher's scolding was just embarrassment. For workers like her, each harsh word was tied to livelihood. We kept talking, time slipping away unnoticed. I told her about my classmates, about how some had gone out for dessert. Then I blurted, half joking. If it hadn't rained, I'd probably be home by now. She laughed softly. But if it hadn't rained, we wouldn't be here talking together, would we? Her words stopped me cold. My heart skipped, warmth rushing to my face. I sneaked a glance and caught the same faint glow in her eyes. The rain lasted nearly an hour. When it finally eased, the street shimmered with puddles, the smell of wet earth rising into the air. We wheeled our bikes out, riding together since our paths were the same. Drops still fell from the rooftops, sprinkling our shoulders and hair. Somehow, the way back felt shorter, lighter. Back at the boarding house, Han turned to me with a smile. Thanks to the rain, I had company today. Made it less lonely. I didn't know how to respond, so I just smiled back. But inside, something had quietly begun to grow, something fragile, unnamed. That night, I lay awake, the fan rattling as always. But instead of irritation, I felt strangely calm. In my mind replayed the image of Han, soaked in rain, smiling in that sudden downpour. And I realized, maybe this city wouldn't be only lonely days after all. After that rainy evening, it felt as if an invisible thread had formed between Han and me. We didn't speak of it, didn't name it, but the distance between us had quietly grown shorter. One evening, while I was studying, I heard a knock on my door. When I opened it, Han stood there with an old electric fan in her hands, one blade broken. She smiled shyly. Are you free? Can you take a look at this? It makes a terrible noise, and it's too hot without it. I nodded and took it. The fan was ancient, its frame covered in dust, the shaft dry with rust. I dug out some oil and began loosening the screws. Han sat nearby, chin resting on her hand, watching me. From time to time, she spoke. Back in my village, when the fan broke, we just waved a bamboo fan all night. You're pretty good at this. Maybe you'll be an engineer one day. I laughed, but inside I felt strangely proud. Fixing such a small thing suddenly made me important. When the fan finally hummed smoothly again, she clapped her hands. Wonderful. Thank you. Tomorrow I'll cook. Come eat with me. I nodded awkwardly, but my heart leapt at the thought. The next day, after class, I found her preparing vegetables, washing dishes. She made sour fish soup and fried eggs. We sat cross-legged on the mat, eating together. The little room felt warm, almost like home. She asked about school, and I answered, realizing I felt like her younger brother, but sometimes, when her eyes lingered, it felt like something more. It wasn't just the fan. A few days later, she asked me to carry heavy buckets of water from the communal well. Sweat poured down my back, and she laughed. Boys are strong. If I did that, I'd break my back. Another evening, the bulb in her room flickered. I climbed onto a chair to change it, while she looked up from below. With you next door, she said softly, I feel safer. Her words made my chest tighten. Soon, it became routine. She would knock on my door for small things, to borrow scissors, to ask me to watch a neighbor's child, to chat while cooking. And I found myself seeking her out too, helping chop vegetables, sharing meals. They were all tiny acts, but inside me, they stirred something vast. I began to wait for her knock each night. Coming back from class, if I saw her door closed and silent, disappointment sank into me. One night, while we were eating, she suddenly asked, Do you have a girlfriend? I froze, blushing. No, not yet. I just want to focus on studying. And, I'm shy. She laughed, though her eyes dimmed a little. You're still young, you have time. Me, my time's probably over. Her words hung heavy in the room, mixing with the whir of the fan. I stared at my bowl, not daring to ask more. But I understood, loneliness weighed on her, deeper than I could imagine. After that night, I noticed her more. Every knock, every request, every smile of thanks, they all made my heart beat faster. After that dinner with Han, something inside me began to change. Before, whenever I came back from school, I would head straight to my room, shut the door, and collapse onto the mat. Now, the first thing I did was glance at her door. If it was open and light spilled out, my heart felt strangely light, as if something good was waiting for me. One evening, as I parked my bike, I heard her call. "You're back. If you're free, come help me for a bit." I stepped over and found her peeling sweet potatoes. I sat down on the floor to help. The smell of raw vegetables mixed with the damp air after the rain, making the space feel oddly comforting. She told me about her shift at the factory, and I told her about my classes. The conversation stretched naturally, from small talk to stories about our hometowns. Sometimes, even without reason, she would knock on my door, smiling as she said, "Sitting alone is boring. Come talk with me." At first I felt shy, but soon it became normal. Eventually, I even found excuses to knock on her door, pretending to borrow scissors, or asking for salt, just to sit with her for a few minutes. I realized that between us there was now a different kind of distance. No longer strangers, not quite love, but something far beyond polite neighborliness. A glance, a smile, the brush of a hand, each one made my heart race. One night, when the power went out, everyone dragged chairs into the yard to catch some breeze. I sat near Han under the moonlight. The others laughed and chatted noisily, but we stayed quiet, listening to the wind. My hand accidentally touched hers resting on the chair. I jerked back instinctively, but she didn't move away. My pulse pounded in my ears, my face burned, and she only gave a faint smile, eyes fixed on the distance. From that moment, it felt like we had stepped a little closer. She found more reasons to come to me, an electric socket that needed fixing, vegetables to wash. When I came home exhausted one evening, she brought me a cup of lemonade and said, "Drink this before you study." These small gestures warmed me more than any big gesture ever could. Once, in the middle of our talk, I asked, "Do you ever feel lonely here?" She looked at me for a while before nodding. "Of course. But after a while, you get used to it. Besides, with you next door, it's not so bad." Those words echoed in my head all night. With you next door. Slowly, her presence became strangely essential to me. A day without seeing her felt empty. Just hearing her laugh in the hallway eased something in me. I knew then that what I felt was no longer just comfort or friendliness. It was something deeper. That night, as the rain pattered on the roof, I lay in bed asking myself if I was stepping into something I shouldn't. But the image of her smile returned, brushing aside my doubts. I knew the distance between us had grown so short that one more step would change everything. That night, the entire boarding house was suddenly plunged into darkness. The fan stopped with a clunk, the light flickered once and went out. Voices rose from every room. Someone shouted, "Power's out again, probably overloaded." I sat in my room for a while, sweat already trickling down my back. The summer heat in the city was suffocating. Without a fan, it was unbearable. I grabbed a chair and stepped outside. Many others had already brought plastic stools into the yard to catch some breeze. Laughter echoed, and someone even pulled out a guitar and strummed a tune. I was about to sit alone when Han carried out a small chair, fanning herself with a paper fan. Seeing me, she smiled. "Sit with me. It's too stuffy inside." I pulled my chair closer. Above us, the moon shone brightly, its pale light covering the boarding house. The night breeze carried the smell of damp earth and the faint scent of wildflowers. Everything felt strangely peaceful. The neighbors chatted noisily about work and family. Han and I sat more quietly. We listened to the guitar in the distance, the late cicadas buzzing in the bushes. After a while, she asked softly, "So, how's life here for you now? Are you getting used to it?" I nodded. "I'm starting to. Some days are tough, but with everyone around, with you here, I don't feel so alone." She turned to look at me, her eyes glimmering in the moonlight. My heart skipped a beat. We sat in silence. Then, as I shifted in my seat, my hand brushed against hers resting on the chair. At first I pulled back, startled, but she didn't move away. My heart thudded loudly, heat rushing to my face. She only smiled faintly, still gazing into the distance. In that moment, every other sound seemed to fade. All I could feel was the night wind, and the warmth of her hand. Later, someone told a funny story and the whole yard burst into laughter. We laughed too, but inside I was still trembling. Even after our hands had separated, the warmth lingered on my skin. As the night grew late, people drifted back to their rooms. Han and I stayed outside a little longer, as if neither of us wanted it to end. She spoke quietly, her voice lower than usual. Sometimes, nights like this make life feel lighter. No machines, no noise, just the wind and the moon. I nodded, words stuck in my throat. I wanted to say more, to tell her what was in my heart, but hesitation held me back. So we simply sat there, letting the silence speak for us. When the lights suddenly flicked back on, cheers erupted from every room. Han stood, smiling at me. Go to bed. You have class tomorrow. Good night. I nodded, my pulse still racing. Walking back to my room, I knew I wouldn't sleep easily. Over and over in my mind, I replayed the image of her eyes in the moonlight, and the feeling of our hands touching without either of us pulling away. That powerless night had drawn a new line in our relationship. The distance between us now felt like only a thin thread, waiting for one step to break it. After the night without power, Han and I grew even closer. We laughed more when we met in the hallway. When I came back from class, she often called out, "Have you eaten yet? Are you hungry?" I found myself knocking on her door more often too, sometimes pretending to borrow scissors or ask for salt, but really just wanting to spend a few minutes with her. One hot evening, as I was studying, there was a familiar knock. I opened the door and saw Han holding a small aluminum pot. She smiled. I was making soup but ran out of salt. Do you have some? I handed her the bag of salt. She hesitated, then said, "Why don't you come sit in my room for a while? It's lonely eating alone." My heart quickened as I nodded. Her room was still small, but neat. A vase of yellow chrysanthemums stood on the table, and the warm glow of the lamp gave everything a soft light. I sat on the mat while she stirred soup on the electric stove. She asked, "How was school today?" I told her about assignments, about classmates, then asked in return, "Your work is so hard. Do you ever think of going back home?" She shook her head, eyes fixed on the pot boiling. "I miss my village, yes. But how could I live there? My husband works the fields, but it's never enough. That's why I have to stay here." Her voice dropped low. I stayed quiet, my chest heavy with sympathy. That evening's dinner was simple: soup, fried eggs, a plate of dried fish. Yet it tasted better than anything I had eaten since arriving. We talked and laughed, but there were also moments of silence, when words seemed unnecessary. After dinner, rain began to fall hard on the corrugated roof. Wind slipped through the cracks in the door. Han poured tea and we sat facing each other. The lamplight turned her face a warm pink. I looked at her, restless inside. She told me about long night shifts, when she was so tired she could sleep standing. She spoke of missing her village, her parents, and even her husband far away, though the distance between them had grown wider. I listened quietly, my heart aching. Then she asked softly, "Do you ever feel lonely?" I froze, unsure how to respond. Finally, I said the truth. "Yes, very much. But when I'm with you, it feels less heavy." Her eyes shimmered. We fell into silence. The rain outside, the rattle of the old fan, all of it faded. Only her gaze remained, steady on mine. I don't know who leaned in first. I only remember her breath warm on my cheek, the faint scent of her damp hair, and then the touch of her lips on mine. It felt like everything broke open at once. I trembled, caught between shyness and desire. She whispered, "We shouldn't," but she didn't push me away. That night, we didn't stop. Afterwards, we lay in silence. The rain still drummed on the roof. I turned to see her eyes closed, a tear slipping down her cheek. I wanted to speak, but my throat locked. She whispered, almost to herself, "Some things shouldn't happen, but they already have." I took her hand and held it tightly. I couldn't promise anything, but inside I was overwhelmed by both fear and happiness. That night, a boundary was erased. From neighbors, from almost siblings, we had stepped into something new, sweet but dangerous. I knew there was no going back. The next morning, I woke when sunlight slipped through the cracks of the door. I had barely slept. All night, my mind replayed the touch of lips, the grip of hands, everything that had happened. I sat up, my chest both light with happiness and heavy with worry. It felt as if I had stepped through a door into a new land, sweet but dangerous. Outside, the boarding house was already alive with noise. Someone called out, pots clattered, children laughed and cried. I opened my door, and at the same moment Han opened hers. Our eyes met. For an instant, we both froze. Her cheeks flushed, and she quickly looked down, pretending to fix her hair. I forced a smile. "You're up early." Her voice was low. "I have the morning shift." She hurried off toward the water well, not looking back. My heart pounded. All the closeness of the past days seemed to collapse into awkwardness. That whole morning, I sat at my desk but couldn't focus. My mind kept returning to her face in the sunlight, distant yet filled with unspoken words. I didn't know what to do, whether to meet her openly or to act as if nothing had happened. In the evening, when I came back, she was washing clothes outside. I stood hesitating, then gathered courage. Tonight I'll cook dinner. Will you eat with me? She looked up, eyes flickering with hesitation, then gave a small nod. All right, I'll make the soup. You do the rest. We cooked together. At first the air was stiff, but it softened with the smell of rice steaming, the sound of chopping vegetables. Sitting down to eat, I caught a faint smile at the corner of her lips. During the meal, we talked about ordinary things, school assignments, factory shifts, the price of vegetables. Neither of us mentioned the night before. But the silence between words, the weight in our glances, carried the truth neither dared to name. After dinner, as I cleared the dishes, she sat quietly, her fingers twisting the edge of her shirt. Finally, she spoke in a low voice, almost a whisper. What happened yesterday, let's just think of it as a mistake, okay? Her words struck like a blade. My chest tightened, but I understood she was trying to preserve some fragile peace. I lowered my head and answered softly, I understand. But inside, I knew it wasn't the same anymore. Once we had crossed that line, there was no returning to what we were before. That night, lying on my mat, I couldn't sleep. I thought of her eyes when she spoke those words, of the fleeting smile during dinner. Between us, a rope had been tied, pulled tight, but hidden away. Outside, the boarding house bustled as always. A TV blared next door, workers sang karaoke, dogs barked in the alley. But inside me there was only silence, heavy and strange. I knew from now on, our bond would grow sweeter, but also more dangerous. After that night, life between Han and me was no longer the same. We still talked, still greeted each other, but with caution. The more we tried to act normal, the more awkward our glances became. Sweetness mixed with unease, as if we were holding a secret too heavy for such a crowded place. The boarding house wasn't big. News and gossip traveled fast. I started noticing strange looks from neighbors. Once, when I stepped out of Han's room, a woman carrying water buckets passed by. She gave me a sideways smile, as if she knew something. I pretended not to notice, but my ears burned hot. One afternoon at the well, I overheard whispers behind me. They've been awfully close lately. Yeah, always together at night. Makes you wonder. I pretended not to hear, but each word pierced me like a needle. My hands shook so badly I almost dropped my cup. Another evening, when I came back from school, the kids playing in the yard started giggling and chanting. The student and the worker, eating dinner together every night. Their laughter stung. I snapped, stop talking nonsense. They only laughed harder, scattering in all directions. I hurried back to my room, my chest tight with shame and anger. That night, when I visited Han, she sat quietly, her face clouded. She said in a low voice, I think people are starting to notice us. I couldn't answer. I felt the same weight pressing down. Every step in the hallway felt like being watched. It seemed like one careless move could expose everything. I said, maybe, we should keep some distance for a while. Just until things calm down. She looked up, her eyes glistening. You're right, but it makes me sad. Her words cut into me. I knew she felt the same conflict, wanting to hide, yet aching to be close. That tension wore us down. In the days that followed, we saw each other less. I buried myself in books, trying to block out the stares and whispers. But at night, lying on my mat, I still longed for her voice, her smile. Meanwhile, the gossip spread faster. Whispers filled the hallways, chatter floated around the well. Someone even told me directly, you should focus on your studies. Don't get tangled up in trouble. I flushed red, lowered my head, and walked away quickly. Each day, the pressure mounted. Han and I were like two people walking a tightrope, knowing a single gust of wind could send us crashing down. We lived in fear, but neither of us could end it. The fire had already been lit inside us. The harder we tried to smother it, the brighter it burned. In the days that followed, Han and I lived under constant tension. On the outside, we tried to act normal. On the inside, it felt like a hidden fire burned between us. We met less often, exchanging only quick words in the hallway, but every glance carried too much meaning. One afternoon, when I returned from class, I found her sitting in front of her room, staring blankly at her old phone. The screen still glowed. Her face was pale, her lips trembling. I hurried over. What's wrong? She looked up, her eyes wet. My husband, he said he's coming to Hanoi next week. I froze. My chest tightened as if gripped by a fist. Blood rushed to my face, hot and dizzying. I stammered. Really? So suddenly? She forced a bitter smile, her voice catching. He said he misses me, and that there are things he wants to talk about. I don't know what to do. I sank into the small chair beside her, my thoughts spinning. A flood of fears hit me at once. If he suspected, if he noticed anything, everything between us would collapse. Worse, it could end in disaster. Her eyes held desperation. Tell me what I should do. These past nights I can't sleep. Just imagining him knocking on the door makes my heart pound. I stayed silent for a long while, then tried to steady my voice. Maybe, we should keep our distance. When he's here, I'll stay out of sight. Don't let him suspect anything. She nodded, but her face stayed tense. My words were only a thin cover. Her fear wouldn't vanish that easily. Over the next few days, she grew thinner. At night I could hear her turning restlessly, sighs drifting through the thin walls. I too lay awake, caught in thoughts. Part of me dreaded exposure. But another part ached at the thought of her forcing herself into the role of dutiful wife. As the day approached, the boarding house buzzed. I overheard neighbors whisper, "Her husband's coming, wonder what for." Each word sank heavy in my chest. The night before his arrival, she knocked on my door. Her face was gaunt, dark circles under her eyes. She sat down, her voice trembling. "If anything happens, don't show yourself. Don't let him notice you. I don't want you in trouble." I took her hand, my heart twisting. "I understand, but you must take care too. I don't want to see you suffer more." She gave a weak smile, then stood. Before leaving, she looked back once, her eyes shimmering with things unsaid. That night, I lay awake until dawn. The crowing of roosters carried faintly from far away, mixed with the roar of early motorbikes. My heart pounded like a drum. Tomorrow, our fragile peace would face its first real test. The day Han's husband came, the whole boarding house felt different. I woke early but couldn't study. All morning I paced in my room, my heart beating like a drum. Near noon, a motorbike stopped at the gate. I peeked out and saw a tall, thin man with sun-darkened skin, wearing an old shirt. His face was stern, his eyes sharp, as if always suspicious. He parked his bike and walked straight to Han's room. Her door opened. Han stepped out, forcing a smile. "You must be tired from the long trip." He nodded, his voice rough. "It's fine. Been a long time since I came here." I quickly pulled my head back, my chest pounding. Every word between them reached my ears like sparks on dry straw. At lunch, the smell of their food drifted into my room. I sat at my desk, staring at books I couldn't read. Their voices, the clinking of chopsticks, pressed down on me with unbearable weight. That afternoon, when I went to the well, I suddenly ran into him. His cold eyes scanned me from head to toe. I forced a smile. "Hello, brother." He gave only a curt nod and turned away. But his gaze cut through me, leaving a chill in my bones. He stayed at the boarding house for several days. The air grew heavy. Every time I passed, I felt his suspicion like a shadow at my back. I no longer dared to step into Han's room. I only stole glances through the door when walking by. One night, as I tried to study, I heard them arguing. Han's voice was choked. "Why did you come here? What about the work back home?" His voice was harsh. "It's the same there. I wanted to see how you've been living here." A chair scraped loudly, then silence. I sat frozen, sweat beading on my forehead. After that, Han rarely came outside. Her face grew pale, her eyes tired. When our eyes met briefly in the hallway, neither of us dared to speak. I realized his presence was a dark shadow over everything. The fragile bond between us now stood on the edge of exposure. At any moment, the truth could break free. And I lived each day in restless fear, as if hiding a secret that could not be revealed. The presence of Han's husband made the entire boarding house feel heavier. Some neighbors cast curious glances, others whispered behind their hands. I lived in constant fear, as if carrying a secret that couldn't be spoken aloud. He stayed for several days. During the day, he went with Han to the market. In the evenings, he sat drinking tea with the men in the yard. But his eyes were always sharp, especially when they landed on me. I never dared look back, only bowed quickly and slipped away. One night, as I sat reading in my room, there was a knock at my door. When I opened it, it was him. My heart jumped, my hands shook. He asked bluntly, "You're the new student here, right?" I forced a smile. "Yes, I just started school not long ago." He nodded slowly, eyes still probing. "How's your studying? Getting used to living here?" I stammered through short answers. He stood in silence for a while, as if trying to draw something out of me, then finally turned and walked away. When the door closed, I collapsed into my chair, sweat soaking my back. Awkward encounters kept happening. Once, while carrying buckets of water from the well, I nearly collided with him. Water splashed everywhere. He frowned. "Watch where you're going." I bowed my head, mumbling an apology, my heart thudding. The worst was when we passed in the narrow hallway. Just a few feet between us, yet it felt suffocating. I didn't dare glance toward Han's room, afraid he would notice something. One evening, the whole boarding house gathered for a shared hotpot dinner in the yard. I couldn't refuse to join without drawing attention. By chance, I ended up sitting directly across from Han and her husband. Under the yellow light, the three of us at one table, it was unbearable. He raised his beer and squinted at me. "So, what are you studying?" I answered softly, "Information technology." He gave a thin smile, half joking, half bitter. "Study hard. Someday you'll have to support a wife and kids. Not like me, farming barely feeds us." I forced a laugh, trying to hide my unease. Across the table, Han's eyes flicked toward me, then quickly away. Just that fleeting glance was enough to choke me, leaving the food tasteless in my mouth. That night, I lay awake, tangled in my thoughts. His presence had turned the boarding house into a cage, stifling both me and Han. We couldn't reveal ourselves, yet we couldn't step back either. With each passing day, our secret felt more like a ticking bomb, waiting to explode. The days that followed felt like a nightmare. Tuan, Han's husband, continued to stay at the boarding house. During the day he sometimes went to the market with her or looked for temporary work. At night, he sat drinking with the men in the yard. Each time I passed, his eyes slid toward me, cold and suspicious, and sweat broke across my back. Han and I barely spoke. At most, our eyes met briefly at the well or in the hallway. Those glances held 1,000 words but were forced into silence. It felt as if a thick wall had been built between us, transparent yet suffocating. Inside, I was torn apart. At times I burned with jealousy when I saw him walking beside her, when she served him food. I knew she was only fulfilling her duty, but my chest tightened as if pricked by needles. At other times, I blamed myself for stepping into this dangerous path, dragging both of us into days of fear. One evening, I sat with books open before me, but no words entered my head. From outside came Tuan's laughter, the clinking of glasses with the other men. I closed my notebook and pressed my head to the table. The air itself felt heavy, choking me. That night, restless from the heat, I opened the window. Her room still glowed with light. Through the thin curtain I saw her moving back and forth, while Tuan lounged in a chair. My heart clenched. In that moment, I wanted nothing more than to rush over and pull her out, but my legs refused to move. I knew I had no right. The next day I tried returning late to avoid them. But once, as I entered the gate, Tuan was sitting outside. His eyes pinned me, and he spoke in a tone half joking, half sharp. "You're a diligent student, aren't you? Always out early and home late." I forced a smile. "Yes, my schedule is full. Many classes." He smirked, his gaze like a blade, then turned away. Even that short exchange left me drenched in cold sweat. Han grew paler with each day. Her face hollowed, her eyes tired. When our eyes met in passing, she gave only the faintest smile, full of sorrow. I longed to reach out, to ask if she was all right, but fear of discovery chained me down. At night I lay sleepless on my mat. The chirp of insects at the fence, the roar of late motorbikes, all of it pressed down, amplifying my sense of confinement. I felt like a man locked in a room with no exit. Each day was torture, tangled in both desire and dread. I began scribbling in a small notebook. Not full sentences, just fragments, suffocating. Can't breathe. Want to escape but can't. The uneven lines were my only release. But no matter how I tried, I couldn't break free. Each day I saw Han weary and worn down, each time I caught Tuan's suspicious glance, my heart grew more restless. I knew sooner or later, something would happen. And when it did, nothing would ever be the same again. The heavy days dragged on, until one evening everything erupted. I was at my desk when shouting burst from Han's room. At first it was low, then rose into harsh voices. Tuan's tone was sharp, accusing. "You think I don't know anything? Living here alone and so comfortable, huh?" Han's voice shook, trembling with tears. "What are you saying? I only go to work and then come home. What do I have for you to suspect?" A chair scraped hard across the floor, heavy footsteps pounding against the cement. My heart raced as I sat frozen, listening. Tuan's voice boomed again, like a hammer striking. "I've heard what people are saying. And you still think you can hide it from me?" Sweat soaked my back. The rumors of the boarding house had finally reached him, and now Han was the one to bear it all. She tried to steady her voice. "Let them say what they want. If you don't trust me, then so be it. I haven't done anything wrong." But her words shook, barely audible through the sound of rain outside. Tuan's voice rose louder. "Nothing wrong. Then how do you explain everyone talking about you?" A loud crash followed, as if he had slammed the table or kicked something over. I stood, ready to rush in, but my legs wouldn't move. I knew if I appeared now, everything would collapse. Han's muffled sobs cut into me like knives. My fists clenched, teeth grinding. A reckless thought surged in me. I should take her away from this, pull her out of his life. But reason chained me down. I could only remain in the dark, listening as the argument dragged on. Finally came the sound of a door slamming, footsteps storming away, and then silence. The boarding house stirred with whispers. Heads poked out into the hallway. Another fight again. Poor Han, married to such a hot-tempered man. The murmurs spread. I locked my door and sat motionless. Inside me, fear, pity, and anger tangled into a storm without escape. That night, I couldn't read a single line. I lay staring at the roof, ears echoing with Han's sobs and his furious shouts. One thought burned clearer than ever: if I get the chance, I'll take her away. No matter the cost, I'll free her from this suffocating life. After the night of fierce arguments, the boarding house grew even heavier. People whispered more, neighbors glanced toward Han's room whenever they passed. I lived in stifling days, torn between fear and the desperate hope that something would change. A few days later, one morning, I saw Tuan packing his things. He stuffed clothes into an old backpack, his face tight with anger. I watched from behind my door, heart racing. Finally, he was leaving. Before getting on his bike, I heard him speak to Han in a stern voice. "Live properly here. I don't want to hear any more rumors." Han only nodded, lips pressed together. Her eyes drifted away, avoiding his. The motorbike roared, then faded into the distance. The whole boarding house seemed to breathe a sigh of relief. I stayed in my room, caught between relief and sorrow. Relief that his suspicious eyes were gone, sorrow at the sight of Han, exhausted, her shoulders trembling in the wind. That afternoon, I made an excuse to buy something and stopped by her room. The door was half open. She sat quietly on the mat, eyes swollen from tears. When she saw me, she forced a faint smile. "He's gone." I sat beside her, my chest tight. I spoke softly. "Don't be sad. This will pass." She didn't answer, only let tears roll down her cheeks. I reached out and gently wiped them away. In that moment, we both seemed to forget the world outside. Days of fear and silence broke open into heavy quietness. I held her hand. She didn't pull away, only sat still, shoulders trembling. Our eyes met, and no words were needed. That night, we stayed together for a long time. We didn't speak much, only listened to the gentle patter of rain on the roof. After the storm of arguments, the calm air wrapped around us, giving me a fragile sense of peace. Yet I knew this peace was only temporary. Her husband had left, but his shadow lingered. The rumors lingered, and the road ahead for Han and me was as unclear as ever. After Tuan left, the atmosphere in the boarding house slowly returned to normal. Laughter echoed more freely, the neighbors whispered less. But inside me and Han, a fire that had long been suppressed began to burn fiercely. In those days, I often found excuses to visit her room. Sometimes to borrow scissors, sometimes to bring food. She never refused. Often, she smiled, as if she too was waiting. That small room, with its warm yellow light and the smell of freshly cooked rice, became a shelter for two souls desperate for warmth. One evening, after dinner, I lingered longer than usual. Han poured tea, and we sat across from each other. Her face still carried traces of sadness, but her eyes were softer now. I blurted out, "Sometimes I think, I wish you didn't have to suffer like this." She was silent for a long time before whispering, "Life doesn't let us choose everything." I looked at her calloused hands, and a wave of tenderness surged through me. I reached out and held them. She flinched slightly but didn't pull away. In that moment, every distance between us disappeared. I leaned closer, and this time there was no hesitation. Our kiss consumed us, hotter, hungrier. She wrapped her arms around me, her breath quickening, her shoulders trembling. That night, we no longer stopped at hesitation. The fire ignited, pulling us both into the storm of feeling, into the longing to finally live true to our hearts. After that night, everything changed. We grew closer than ever. We shared the simplest moments, cooking a meal, tidying the room, or just sitting quietly together, and even silence felt like peace. Those short days passed in an extraordinary happiness. It felt like living inside a fragile dream, one that could vanish upon waking. In her eyes, I saw both light and worry. She once whispered to me, "One day, we will pay a price. But at least, I don't regret it." I held her tightly, my chest swelling with both joy and fear. I knew this path had no escape. Yet in those moments, I didn't want to think about the future. I only wanted to hold on to those fleeting days of peace, like guarding a rare treasure in my life. In the days that followed, Han and I lived in a fragile sweetness. We still cooked together, still talked late into the night. Sometimes, silence alone was enough to make me feel at peace. Yet beneath it all, I knew nothing could last forever. The whispers in the boarding house hadn't faded. I caught them by the well, saw the glances filled with meaning. Each time I stepped outside, it felt like someone was watching. Some even smirked when I passed by. One evening, when I entered Han's room, she was sitting quietly at the table. A half-written letter lay before her. When I asked, she only sighed. I think, maybe we should stop. My heart clenched. I stared at her, lost for words. She went on, her voice trembling. We've gone too far. If this continues, one day everything will collapse. I don't want you to suffer more. I stayed silent, holding her hand. I wanted to say I wasn't afraid, that I would stay, but the words wouldn't come. In her eyes I saw the struggle between longing and fear. That night, I couldn't sleep. I opened my small notebook and began to write. The words spilled out, heavy and raw. Happiness can be brief. I know this is wrong, but my heart won't listen. In this cramped boarding house, I found a light. But it is fragile, threatened by rumors and stares. I write so that no matter what happens, I'll remember there were days I lived true to myself. I wrote endlessly, as if confessing, as if clinging to something. Each page of my diary soaked in both sweetness and sorrow. In the days that followed, Han and I met less often. We both knew that closeness invited danger. Yet each time I caught sight of her in the yard, my heart ached. One afternoon, I stood on the second floor, looking down. She was washing clothes, her hair falling loose, her face distant. In that moment, I understood. Some feelings cannot be named, cannot be shown, only kept in the heart and preserved in writing. This diary became the witness to that time. The time I left my village, lived in a cramped boarding house, and met a woman who changed everything. I don't know what the future will bring. Maybe one day she'll leave. Maybe we'll never meet again. But I know the fire she lit in me will remain, a scar, a memory that will never fade. I closed the notebook and exhaled. Outside, motorbikes roared past, children laughed, a radio played an old song. Life in the boarding house carried on, ordinary as ever. But for me, everything had changed. This is my diary, my boarding house diary. If you enjoyed this story, please give it a like, share it, and don't forget to hit the subscribe button to support a new writer like me.